When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube. Today's video, I kind of want to respond to a clip I've seen. It was from a while ago where George R.R. Martin was asked about, was Robert's rebellion justified?
I don't think I would have stayed loyal to the Mad King. Do I think they were justified? Yeah, yes and no. I don't like to provide easy answers to that. I like to make the reader wrestle with the question.
It's quite an interesting question because us, being on the supporting of Ned, he's the main character of book one. We obviously know why he participates in Robert's rebellion. But was the conflict really justified in a sense of the carnage that occurred, the loss of life that occurred, the damages to property, to the average person's well-being? Was it justified? And so that's what we're kind of going to talk about in this video. But before we do, if you did want to become a Patreon, you do get videos early and or get some exclusive content, as I'm doing all my House of the Dragon videos for YouTube members and Patreon members. So consider that if you did want to become one. Also, thank you to the people that have done that. Thank you for supporting me and all of that stuff as well. But I want to talk about what is the actual definition of justified. So the definition for justified is having done for or marked by a good or legitimate reason. So this is in terms of looking at Robert's rebellion. Why do we end up going to war in terms of Robert and Ned calling basically the kingdoms to go to war? So the first thing is that Ned Stark loses both his father and his brother to the Mad King. Now, in a lot of ways, you could say Brandon Stark's death is not unwarranted. He did threaten the prince. And we know that that was maybe because of a justified reason, believing that Rhaegar may have kidnapped his sister. But in terms of breaking the law, you can't threaten the crown prince. That is obviously breaking the law. So maybe Brandon's death maybe you could justify that from Aerys, given the fact that he broke the law. But in the terms of how it was done, and also Rickard, Ned's father, how he was killed, that is not justified. Rickard broke no laws. He actually came to King's Landing when you probably shouldn't have, and he tried to answer for his son's crimes, and it didn't go well. So then you have the next part of this where Aerys then wants Ned and Robert to be killed, and this is completely unjustified for so many different reasons. Now, I personally have talked about this in my Robert's Rebellion series, why I believe Aerys did this, and because I think he realized there was a northern coalition kind of forming, and he didn't know if that was going to be used against him, which it ends up being used against him because but that's more or less on his own actions. But it's completely unjustified for him then to call for their heads. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that we have this rumor that Rhaegar has kidnapped Lyanna. We don't really know how this starts, and we don't know what ended up happening there. And so there's a couple questions that I want to look at. In terms of justifying the war, almost all of it is completely on Ned, on the Starks, what happens to them and the war crimes that happens there. Because the idea of going to war because Lyanna was kidnapped, well, we don't know the proof of that, right? Our forces don't even know where Lyanna is. Brandon thought she was at King's Landing, and that's obviously not where she was. And we find out later on that it probably wasn't a kidnapping, regardless of what you think happened there, regardless if you think it's some N+A theory or Rhaegar and Lyanna or it's something else. It's more than likely it was not a kidnapping. It just seems that that was some rumor that was told. So in a lot of ways, the war seems to have been prompted because majority of the war was kind of started because of two things. The idea of Aerys wanting Robert and Ned's heads, and also this idea of Lyanna being kidnapped. So in terms of about half of it, in terms of Lyanna and Rhaegar, it's unjustified. You're basing off of going to war based upon the idea of a rumor that you were told that you have no fact on. All we know is that Lyanna and Rhaegar are missing. That's it. We have no other factual information to base off if you are Ned or Robert at this time. So that part of it, unjustified to start a war. You just don't know all the facts. You don't know enough information to then say, oh yeah, let's call up all of these people together to lose a bunch of loss of life, to create an entire conflict that's going to harm many different people's lives. Now, the other facet is, the other reasoning is definitely acceptable. Self-defense mixed with the war crimes that had happened to the Stark family. Okay. But then the question becomes, it's a lot more complicated than that. Should other people be going to war because of things that happened to one family, this rich family, the Starks? That's questionable, right? Because in terms of, yes, the Starks were wronged, but was it right to go to war when so many other families that were not involved in this conflict then are going to lose their lives? Think about all the stories we hear about in Feast for Crows with Brienne in terms of the Battle of the Trident or Robert's Rebellion as a whole, or the War of the Ninepenny Kings, all that stuff. War almost seems to never be justified. And that's something that I think George really tries to write, is that war is such a conflict that should be bigger than just two families that are feuding or whatever issues they're having. And I guess you could say 3 or 4 because of the Aarons, the Baratheons, whatnot. But in terms of war, couldn't this conflict have maybe been settled with words? Could this conflict have been settled in other ways? The point of the Robert's Rebellion, and I think why George really likes writing the conflict and what he's talked about in interviews, and what I think I kind of back up as well, is when is violence ever the answer to fixing a situation? In the real world, we look at a situation like World War II, it seems like violence was needed to solve the issue of Germany during World War II because of the things they were doing, the genocides they were committing. It seemed like war was the only solution to that idea. But in terms of something like Robert's Rebellion, it still seems like there could have been talks that could have worked to fix the solution, right? We know that Rhaegar was already trying to take over the throne. That's what the Harrenhal was about. So if Rhaegar and Lyanna had been found, which, again, Ned does find Rhaegar, or finds out where Lyanna was after the war, could that have worked, right? Could there have been a coalition in which Rhaegar worked out with Ned and maybe Robert? The problem is Robert wouldn't have accepted this either, because another contract would have been broken in terms of Lyanna was supposed to marry Robert. Now that wasn't Lyanna's choice, so the justifications, the morality of everything, again, gets thrown kind of in the mud. And that's where I find that this discussion point is so interesting, because in a quick glance, you go, yes, Robert's Rebellion is justified based off of, the Mad King's actions, and he didn't seem like he could be reasoned with. You could also have reasoned with Rhaegar, right? If they were able to come in contact with Rhaegar and set up taking down Aerys, yes, there may have been a conflict needed, but it would not have been as massive as a conflict as there was. Everyone kind of seemed to like Rhaegar more than they liked Aerys. So how would that have gone down? We see that it's much simpler to just bring everything down and go, yes, the Mad King's evil, so that this conflict was justified, when we look at the personal motivations. Robert's ego, his feigned love for Lyanna, even though he didn't really know her at all, would have prevented any type of working alliance between Robert and Rhaegar. So when you bring these personal biases to the front and all these things, it is pretty impossible for the two sides to ever have worked together. But does that justify or make Robert's Rebellion unjustified? It's a clever question, and maybe I'm thinking about this a little bit too much, and maybe I'm just really fascinated by George R.R. Martin's logic on the idea of Robert's Rebellion. But let me know what you guys think about Robert's Rebellion. Like, do you guys think that the war was justified? It was the only real means to the end of the situation that was building in the kingdoms? Part of me says yes, but a part of me also says no. It's just the idea of, okay, Rhaegar, and I think Rhaegar and Lyanna just handled the situation really badly in terms of, okay, Aerys needed to be off the throne. That was quite obvious. Rhaegar had a lot of inaction. He did things that just let things happen, and they just fell apart. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, because you got to remember, at the end of the war, innocent children are going to die. Innocents throughout the entire kingdoms are going to die. Like, one of the things we're going to talk about that I think very similar to Robert's Rebellion is Robb's march and his war justified, right? Think about all the carnage that's going to happen throughout the kingdoms. That's really what Arya and Brienne's storyline is about in the main story, and because of the war and everything that goes on. Is that justified? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.